What's up, guys? Welcome back to Malt Mondays. Glad to see you guys again. This week I'm doing basically the same review that I did last week, but a different version of the same whiskey. So Balvenie 15-year-old single barrel has two versions essentially. Really, I mean, it's a lot of different versions because it's a single barrel, so every barrel is going to be different. But really the difference here is that because they're aged in sherry casks, you have some sherry casks that are refill, which means that they've already held whiskey once before, and you have some that are first fill, which means they've freshly had sherry in them, and then there's whiskey put in them, aged for 15 years and bottled. So that would be the first fill. So if you watch my video from last week, I reviewed this bottle, which was the refill version, and I made a mistake because the labeling and everything on these is identical except for one thing. So last week I read off this little note here, and I don't know if you guys will be able to read it or not. This bottle is one of 650 drawn from a single cask. That's what it says on the tin, right? And I have two tins, one for each bottle that came. The difference is this tin says 800, one of 800. That is the only difference in marking that I have found on these tins. And it corresponds to the labeling on the bottle. So the refill cask one that I have is drawn from no more than 800. So I mistakenly said 650 in my last video because I was reading it off the tin for the first fill. So I'm going to show you guys the way to tell the difference between these two. And it may be true now that I noticed that you can look at the tins and see if it says 650 or 800, but I don't know if that's always true. I wouldn't rely just on that. I would look at the color. And the color is drastically different. The refill here is a dark sherry color. I actually thought it was the first fill bottle the first time that I bought it. And then about 3 weeks later, I saw this on the shelf. And I had never seen a naturally colored whiskey that dark. I mean, I can't even see through the bottle here looking at it. So this is an insanely dark whiskey. And I realized immediately that I had purchased the refill initially. So we're going to set that down there. Don't need that. So what we're looking at today is the Balvenie 15-year-old first fill version. It's bottled at 47.8% ABV, which is really nice. It's non-chill filtered, natural coloring. So it's ticked all the right boxes. It's over 40 proof, natural color, non-chill filtration, etc. Obviously, those things don't necessarily make it a good whiskey. Those are just things I like to see as a consumer, that the company is providing a little more value to me, and respecting that I want a whiskey that's more unadulterated than it is artificially colored to make it look like something it's not. Because, you know, you could easily have a whiskey with no sherry maturation colored to look like this, and people would think it was going to taste really rich, and they would think it would taste a certain way, because we have this association of darker color meaning more flavor, and that's certainly not true. Look at the Islay whiskeys. They're very light, many of them, and they're exploding with flavor. So it's not always true, but it is a little bit of false advertisement, I personally feel, when distilleries use coloring. And sometimes you can tell the companies that use coloring, but they restrain themselves, that their whiskeys are still very light and a very believable color for their age and the type of cask that they've been in. Glenmorangie is a good example of that. I don't find any of their whiskeys to look too dark or have that kind of orangish glow that some of the heavily colored whiskeys have. So anyway, onto this. Nice sound there. That smells delicious. Um, so if you watched my video last week, you'll find that I actually thought the refill version was very, very heavily sherried already. And I would call it a sherry bomb. I mean, sherry was the predominant flavor there, but you could still pick up some of the distillery characteristics. It wasn't completely overpowered. So I would expect this one to be even more intense, even richer, and more full flavored than that. And that one was hands down one of my favorite whiskeys that I own. Really, really good, really well balanced. So we'll see how this one holds up. So just looking at the color, I mean, this is dark whiskey. I think this is the darkest whiskey that I own. And because it's natural coloring, I'm not just sitting here like, oh, this Dalmore is really dark, and that makes it look rich and delicious. This looks delicious because I know that it's natural coloring. So let's see how it smells. Wow. Man, I'm not even sure how to describe this whiskey in terms of what I've normally tasted and in terms of other whiskeys, because this is so rich. It almost just smells like sherry. I mean, you say that when you taste a sherried whiskey like Macallan 12 or like Balvenie 12 Double Wood, which is their entry level offering. You smell it and you say, oh, that smells like sherry, but no, this smells like sherry. This almost, I wouldn't know that it was whiskey just off the initial aroma. I mean, this just smells like someone took raisins and pressed them and put it in a glass. I don't get any alcohol from the 47.8%, so it's definitely well matured, good quality oak here. And now as I kind of get past that initial rich, unctuous sherry aroma, we're getting into some of the whiskey character. So I'm getting a little bit of those oak spices coming in from the European sherry cask. So American casks impart kind of a vanilla sort of flavor, and more butterscotchy caramel flavors, and the European oak tends to be a little bit spicier and drier. So I'm getting a little bit of that in there. Picking up a touch of orange. This almost actually, I was trying to think of how to describe this aroma when I was writing my tasting notes, and this almost reminds me of like paint, and not in a bad way, like, oh, it smells like someone just painted a house, or like it's not like that bad association of paint. It's just like the concentration of it. It almost smells like someone took a sherried whiskey and turned it into a concentrated form and put it in a glass, like you would do with orange juice or something, to freeze it and then ship it. It's just so compressed, and so because of that, I'm going to actually do something. Well, I'll taste it first, but I'm gonna add a little bit of water to this, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So let's taste it first, though. Wow. Definitely spicy. I think the proof, this one's not quite as smooth as the refill one, surprisingly. And of course, that's a variation of Cask. It's a difference between this bottle being a freshly opened bottle, and not having as much air in it as the other one, so it hasn't released some of those more potent vapors yet. I know there's a combination of reasons there, but I think just a lot of it is the oak spice coming through. This one's quite a bit spicier because the cask hasn't lost as much of its influence to another whiskey as it had in the refill version, where it had already held whiskey for some period of time at least. Probably what they do for the ones that are the refill is they probably use those sherry casks to mature their Balvenie double wood, because they only do it for like 2 months or so, and or like 6 months maybe. And some of their other double wood releases, like their 17-year, they probably use those casks a couple times to do that, and then they put a 15-year-old single barrel in there and leave it for 15 years. But some of them, like this one, very obvious that this sherry cask hasn't been used before, because this tastes more like sherry. And on the palate, I mean, I've still got the finish in my mouth. There's prunes, there's raisins, intense sherry. There's a little bit of a nuttiness there, like maybe almonds. I don't quite get the honey that Balvenie kind of has as their distillery characteristic. I mean, maybe a little bit on the but really this is very sherried, and it's so sherried that you kind of lose some of the distillery characteristics, which for some people that's what they want. They want the richest, thickest whiskey they can get, and some people want the slightly more balanced one. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of water to this, and I don't normally do this because I want my reviews to all be the way the whiskey's presented in the bottle, rather than being influenced by some outside factor like the water that I happen to have at my house, that kind of thing. And also, I personally enjoy most whiskeys the natural way that they come in the bottle. There's very few that I find improve with water. However, with this one, because it's a higher proof, it's 48%, and because it's so heavily sherried, you know how I was saying it smells like really concentrated? It actually does smell like closed. And I can tell that with a little bit of water, and time in the bottle will do this as well, time to breathe, I can tell that there's a little more that it could open up to. So we'll smell it again. Yeah, so now with just a few drops of water, it doesn't taste quite so much like just pressed raisins and concentrated sherry. It's actually brightened up the nose a bit. I don't find that the water on this changes the aroma at all. I'm not getting different aromas than I was before, but it kind of lets the aromas breathe out because they're so closed off right now. The only aroma that I think might change is I might be detecting a slight minty note here, like a menthol. But otherwise, it's almost the same. But it does smell, in my opinion, a little bit better with just a couple drops of water. So we'll see if it affects the taste. That tones down the spice a little bit to just the right amount for me. It lets me taste a little bit more chocolate on the palate. But for such a heavily sherried whiskey, this actually doesn't, I don't think, present that much chocolate. which is a little bit unusual. I expected this to be very chocolatey, but it's actually much more to the raisin and prune kind of side of the cherry. So be very careful though. If you notice, I added only like 4 or 5 drops of water with my little 1/4 teaspoon measurement. Adding any more when I was doing this last night, it became very bitter very quickly. It really brought out way too much of the oak influence, and it was not pleasant. So do experiment with water on this one if you have the first fill, but be very careful with it because it will drown and turn really tannic and oaky quite quickly. So I'm going to give this an A. I think the refill version is slightly more balanced and objectively better whiskey. But the thing is, this one's much harder to find. There's not as many of the first fill versions out there, and also you can get comparable flavors to the 15 refill with other whiskeys. I don't think the other ones that you can get the comparable flavor in are as cheap. I mean, granted, it's $100, so it's not cheap, but I think it's extremely good value. This one, though, with the first fill sherry, I think provides a different flavor. It's similar, but it's kind of a unique experience, and I think it's worth prioritizing finding this one over the other one. But that being said, you really have to decide what matters to you. Do you want the richest, most full-flavored whiskey that you can get? Something that you're really going to hand to someone and they're going to be like, wow, that's intense? Or do you want something that's very, very good and very well balanced and really nuanced? Go for the refill version that I did last week. And again, just so you can tell, this the refill will have about the same color, slightly darker than a Macallan 12-year-old, which you should be able to find on the shelf next to it to look at side by side. It's gonna look very, very dark. You might think it was the first fill, but again, I mean, you almost can't even see through the first fill. So, if you like this video, please subscribe to my channel, give it a thumbs up, and share it with your friends. As always, let me know down in the comments below what you think of the Balvenie 15-year-old. If you've had it or if you're planning to buy it. I always enjoy hearing from you guys. And as always, I will see you guys next week. Cheers.